today, Curtis Yarvin is sort of like, the spokesperson for this kind of just hardcore Machiavellian, James Burnham-esque kind of perspective on how things are. It is sort of like a might makes right philosophy. It's like, well, if your enemies are so inept and incompetent, why are they winning? I.e., why are the woke winning if they're just a bunch of mentally ill psychos who are envious of people with real smarts? They're on top. They must be doing something right.
Yeah, with Burnham, I think it's interesting because if you compare his earlier books with one of his later books, like Suicide of the West from '64, the earlier books do seem to be very kind of secular, I would say. There's a kind of lot of criticism of religious myths and kind of what he would think of as fictions. But when you get to Suicide of the West, which is kind of 20 years later, really, than those famous books like The Managerial Revolution and The Machiavellians, he actually brings in Christianity there and talks about it positively. I wouldn't say he's not kind of bashing you over the head with, sort of Christian dogma and so on, but he's just kind of suggesting this kind of as a a worthwhile tradition, really, for the West to hold on to. Yeah. So I think, I don't think Moldberg or Curtis Yarvin, I don't think he's interested in religion, as such. I think you are quite right that he's quite, kind of rationalist. I don't like this about him, actually. I think, he's got this kind of view of sort of kind of neo-feudalist, I don't know, CEOs ruling over, the peasant masses or something, which I think is a very unappealing prospect. But I think Burnham is a bit more of I think Burnham had a better vision for humanity than
I have more of a leveling populist strain in me than a lot of those people. I'm increasingly bothered by, like sort of, I'm also under the influence of it too, and you just hear it in the way I communicate. But this sort of like Bay Area, Silicon Valley, rationalist gray tribe people who have often a sort of barely concealed contempt for like the plebs. I mean, it is colorblind. They're not like some kind of right-wing racist, but they divide everything into the kind of the naturally high IQ who are sort of burdened with having to manage idiots. And so I'm more sympathetic to the idiots than they are. But I also believe in things like IQ, so that's why I say I've got one foot in there. A lot of like the left would deny that even really exists, much less that it's genetically driven. I accept that stuff, but I'd go to bat for the lower IQ or the midwits anyway,
Yeah, well, you're.
Go on.
I'm not really. Sorry, I'm being really low IQ right now. I'm just trying to formulate the
Yeah, of all the times to stumble, and
yeah, right, yeah. Never mind. Whatever I had to say, it couldn't possibly been that important.
But yeah, go ahead.
I was just trying to spit out. There are studies that show there's a correlation between IQ and income, but I know a lot of. I'd have to look at the statistics. Never mind. Shut up, Anne. Put a sock in it.
Yeah, no, I think, there are things like personality differences that can get in the way of someone IQ making a lot of money.
Right.
Like they're just not oriented toward a bunch of, productivity hacks and things. And a lot of the kind of Bay Area strivers, they seem to eat that stuff up. Maybe they would just rather read abstract literature and things that are not that applicable to helping you get a job.
Right, and also people decide like what to pour their IQ into, and some people I've noticed just on the financial level, whatever percentage of your intelligence and effort you're willing to put in, some people are load all that intelligence and effort into making money, whereas some people are more geared towards just saving it. And, you know, what hacks can I use to get around having to spend $800 here? So, you know, they're a little, I'm not saying one way is better than the other. Wow, and can we edit this? That was just a long rambling nothing. I should have my mouth
No,
for a while.
No, this has been streaming live to a bunch of CEOs that subscribe to me. Just kidding.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I haven't been out of the house for a while.
I'm trying to think of a term for this kind of, you know, IQ idolatry that we see with Yarvin and so on. Because I think it's not like a useless concept. Obviously, it has its uses, but I think they you know, they talk about it so much. I think they're not really aware of the limitations of this kind of rationalist idea of thought. Yeah. And I've tried to sort of, this is another thing I've got into, you know, altercations with on Twitter, really, people just trying to explain, you know, that IQ is only it only presents a sort of image of thought, really, from a rationalist point of view, and there's more to thought than this, and it's kind of hard to explain that, but a lot of these you know, kind of tech guys, obviously their I don't know, idea of who they are is heavily invested in this IQ notion, and the idea that, you know, I don't know, maybe a poet has also that kind of intelligence, but just something different, a different kind of intelligence to them, is a bit maybe threatening to them. Yes.
Right, or someone who makes things, like, you know, I've known people who do carpentry that just, it's all this math in your head. And
right. Yeah, I think McLuhan talks about this as well, you know, about IQ testing, kind of eliminating different kinds of people with different talents, which are no longer recognized to be talented, you know, because they're just, you know, deselected by these IQ tests.
Well, and also whatever your IQ is, it's kind of a crapshoot if you study something for years and years and years, and then it turns out to not be lucrative.
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, you can't use these concepts. You know, you can't confuse the map with the territory, right? And you know, I do have this. Sometimes I have this flash, I don't know, of, you know, kind of seeing the future, really, when this Curtis Yarvins of the world take over, and then we're all subjected to IQ tests constantly. And, you know, we have this kind of Gattaca world, right? And I think that would be kind of a dystopia as well, really. You know, we can say we have a kind of, you know, anarcho tyranny or something in Western countries, in the United States especially.
Although psychologically, if you think about it, even if we were able to create a perfect meritocracy, like get all the IQ tests right and get everybody into their slots, if we were living in a meritocracy and we knew it, 50% of us would probably blow our heads up tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I remember there was some discussion about Gattaca, on the you know, the late 90s film about the kind of eugenic society, with Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke, and Jude Law was in it. And somebody mentioned that Nick Land, you know, outsideness, on Twitter. Nick Land had said that was his idea of utopia, right? That's kind of scary in a way. But I mean, it seems so cold, that world, and so formal and suppressed. Everything is, I think, suppressed, heavily suppressed, really.
So the idea of meritocracy, you know, just in general, doesn't really tell you where meritocracy should be applied. There's a kind of liberal rationalist application of meritocracy to even the most private realms of life, so that, you know, let's say you're married, you're committed to somebody, but maybe on any given day you shouldn't be with your partner because the very discrete thing you're aiming to do that day would be better served by someone else who has the proper merits So it's ever more like reductionist, and just sort of like the economy itself keeps breaking the labor market, especially will break things down into precisely the thing that is needed at a certain time. That's why people find it harder to get like, lifetime employment. They're contractors. And maybe if you're working at a restaurant, new technology allows people to change the schedule on you every week because, data tells you that this is the most busy time of day on this, this day of the week during this time of the year. So there's a kind of relentless march of meritocracy, and that is not really so you can't. That's difficult to speak to just by valuing meritocracy in the abstract.
Right. I think maybe some of the maybe sort of cultural impatience with that is what's behind some of the most recent French riots. The ones there are so many, but there are some that are actually about the government is moving back the retirement age another year. So it was 63 in France, and now it's 64. And everyone's very upset about it. And, from an American point of view, it's like, you lazy fuckers, just work another year. What's the difference? But they have this cultural resistance to just, being a cog in a machine. They want to goof off for a couple of hours a day, which, can be frustrating when you're trying to buy soup at 8:45 and the store closes at 9, and, they start kicking you out at 8:30. But, as far as actually being able to find lifetime employment, even if you're not the exact same, even if you're not the exact right fit for the particular bondage and domination session your boss wants to do that day.
Yeah, the counterpart to the consumer's freedom to go buy whatever they want at any time of day is the employee's lack of freedom in being able to sleep at 2 a.m. So
Right.
it's all there's definitely more of an emphasis on how it feels from the labor or producerist side of the ledger, but in the US it's consumer sovereignty runs rampant, and I'm still largely sympathetic to the consumer perspective because all of us are consumers, but not everyone is a laborer in any given market. But like I interact with with different labor markets, different types many times a day, like the gym labor market. I interact with that. The Mexican food labor market. I interact with that. So everyone's a consumer, but not everyone is a particular kind of laborer or producer. So I think the kind of classical liberal emphasis on consumer welfare is largely correct. But as I've gotten older, I've appreciated how it feels from the worker side, and just the uncertainty and precariousness that like consumer sovereignty uber alles creates.
Yeah, I guess
yeah.
I was a producer long before I was a consumer. I worked in restaurants for like 9 years, and then I got a job at a newspaper, and I became a restaurant reviewer.
Huh.
So I went from just the ultimate being shat on in the restaurant industry to the ultimate everyone has to kiss my ass.
Well, interesting juxtaposition there.
Yeah. Yeah, and then after the newspaper industry died, I wound up being a busgirl again in a frat bar.
Yeah. See, that's something a lot of these bright young things in Silicon Valley who got into the West Coast version of the Ivy League, like Stanford or maybe Caltech or something, who got into a school like that at 19 and then just was set thereafter. That's a view they have a hard time understanding. The idea that by the time you're in your 40s, you've had a million different crazy jobs.
Right.
It's a good overview of what it's like, and that's something they can't personally experience.
Right. I mean, when I guess it's not so much now, but when I was a kid, there was, like, I guess you're really a lucky person if you pick computer science and that's the thing that takes off over your lifetime. But when I was younger, you had to be even luckier than that, because not only did you have to pick it before it took off, but your parents had to be able to afford to buy you a personal computer back in the 80s or 90s, which, that cut out, 99% of the people my age from being able to enter that career field. I tried to learn BASIC on a Commodore 64, but there's only so much you can teach yourself on a Commodore 64,
Yeah, I think those early Apple computers were like $2,400 or something for that clunky little tiny yellow and green.
They were ridiculous, but if your parents opt for one of those for you and you had any interest in computer science, you were kind of set. And yeah, you're right. Those people have kind of a, they're all well-meaning people, long-haired, hippie, beer drinking, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, think of how niche that is to really find that a compelling thing. Like, I just like coding because I just like, there's an elegance to the math and the parameters. But I mean, that does not come naturally to most people.
Well, I really liked it.
But that's what we're ruled by.
Yeah, I really liked it, which would have been great for me, but I was missing that one piece of the puzzle. Wow.
Yeah, I never had a Commodore.
I haven't spoken English this much for a very long time.
Yeah, I never had a Commodore, but I did have a ZX Spectrum, which maybe nobody outside the UK probably knows what that is. But
wow, no idea. Do tell.
Yeah. This was a kind of British invention of Sir Clive Sinclair. He was a kind of eccentric British inventor of a sort of type that doesn't really exist anymore. But he came up with this so-called ZX Spectrum, and a lot of kids in Britain learned things like BASIC on that, and learned all about computers through this machine in the 80s, really. So I learned quite a bit, and later I did study computing at university, but I didn't stay in that field. I worked in it for a few years, but I didn't stay there. I wasn't enough of a STEM head, I suppose. So, but I didn't discover that until later on, I guess. Yeah.
So then there's another piece of the puzzle. You have to fit in socially with the STEM heads as well.
Right. You have to have that kind of drive to stay or to kind of follow all the developments in that area. And in those days, when it was about 20 years ago, really, that meant reading all the sort of magazines and keeping up to date with certain blogs and journals and stuff. And I always found it very boring. I would rather be reading Kafka or something, really. So,
right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I find myself having, just forcing myself to listen to certain like industry podcasts because I've got to spend some amount of time on that if I want to just be able to, sound like I know what I'm talking about in an interview, even if once I'm on the job, it never comes up again. You want to be able to talk the talk, and you got to know some of that jargon. So I'll do that, but I'd really rather not.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, having said that, I do have more of an interest compared to Hugouian and some of this AI nerd shit. I'm not gonna lie, but I not as much as a lot of the people 20 years younger than me, but 5 times wealthier have, more than that.
I mean, I did try out the ChatGPT for April 1st because, some of the listeners will know I run the Ballard account on Twitter, quotes of JGB. And I decided to post, a fake quote for April 1st. So I fed a prompt into ChatGPT to sort of produce something kind of vaguely Crash-like, where I don't know, Ballard, the character Ballard and Vaughan are driving on the M25, which was a kind of a giveaway, really, because the M25 didn't exist at the time of Crash. It was written, and then they have a tire blowout, and they have to stop. So we got ChatGPT to produce this after a few attempts with honing the prompt, and it was pretty believable, really. It was pretty, kind of pretty much in Ballard style, I would say. And some people were fooled. Many people were not fooled. I think they kind of got that, this was some kind of fabrication. But it was kind of fun to try it out and see what this AI could do. And I was pretty impressed with what it could do, really. And it's it's just getting started, isn't it? Really, this AI business. So
yeah, there are way more. This is back to the kind of consumer versus producer thing, because there are way more people who are just toying with that and having a good time than there are, employed artists who are threatened by it. So, in the long run, these consumers are just probably going to get their way. I mean, if you like check adding up in some utilitarian sense their welfare versus the unemployed artists, the consumers have more points. So I mean, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, my friends, longtime high school friends, who they got their various careers and stuff. Most of them are not doing AI stuff, but they're all having fun making AI art lately, and they're having much more fun with that than Chat GPT stuff, because just people are more moved and find images more exciting than words, so they're doing a lot of that. But yeah, they're sort of chipping away at full-time employment, and they don't even know it. Someone's full-time employment,
Yeah. Although I gotta say, as a proofreader who was put out of work by spell check, and then an editor who was put out of work by no one giving a shit whether anything is spelled correctly or done right on the internet, and then a writer who's put out of work by, oh, well, we can get this written shittily but cheap by someone from India who barely speaks English. When they come for the artists and they never said anything about them coming for me, fuck you guys.
Yeah, that sort of contributes to this longward march of capitalism getting what it wants, because everyone who feels fucked over by some aspect of it, it's personal because it has a cultural dimension. Like those types of people did that to me, so why should I give a shit about what capitalism is now doing to them?
Exactly.
And so that kind of tit for tat, just if that's like just how it all goes down, there's no way to really coordinate against this big impersonal amoral elephant to cite a book named capitalism getting what it wants, and no one can coordinate it to stop it.
Right. And as long as they've got their beer in hand, they can't even coordinate themselves, much less care.
Yeah, speaking of beer, I mean, how many people who are like boycotting Bud Light have gone right back to Bud Light?
I honestly didn't think anyone outside of gay bars in Chicago drank that shit.
Really? I thought gay bars would be the one place where they didn't, but
every gay bar in Chicago is just plastered with rainbow Bud Light signs, because a lot of socializing that's not just getting shit-faced drunk goes on in bars like that. And people play volleyball, there's a lot of sports leagues, so people come in hungover, they don't want to get drunk again, so they want to drink a shitty light beer, and Bud has been all over that market share for years. I don't know what they thought they were doing. I just talked to somebody who was saying, yeah, I was telling her, like, why are their sales going down? They have so much sales in LGB bars. And she was like, well, they're kind of losing the lesbian and bisexual women.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. All the different groups under the LGBTQI umbrella, like lesbians out of all, I think, have been like getting the shaft, so to speak, in recent years. It's almost like, and to a lesser extent, like female to male trans. It's just like that. Butch dykes and female to male trans. I mean, they're just not part of the fabulosity machine that is LGBTQ right now.
Right?
atop the girl power that already exists. So.
Yeah, I don't see any butch bull dykes being given a beer deal and a makeup deal and a bra deal. No, it's a dude in a dress.
Yeah, in the battle between Caitlyn Jenner and Chaz Bono, Jenner fucking won easily.
Yeah, and all the exact kind of straight girls who will show up at pride parades and get shit-faced drunk are all like, fabulous, Dylan, fabulous.
Yeah, that's interesting right there, because a lot of the right have sort of joined with the so-called TERFs in denouncing drag shows as like mocking women.
Right.
And yet, like, a huge part of the drag audience is women and their gay guy friends.
Right.
So it's like a concern trolling thing.
And also, I think you've noticed me whining about this. The left and the right seem to have just decided that they're just going to switch arguments with each other about random things like war, women's rights. Just going to, like, in the middle of the night someday, nobody sent me the memo, but they all just flipped. Like, oh yeah, now the Democrats are into war, the Republicans don't want war. Why? Nobody knows. We tossed a coin in the middle of the night. Now this team has to go this way, and that team has to go that way.
It was like that with COVID, you remember, right? In the early days.
Right, yeah.
The left was saying, it's nothing to worry about. If you worry about it, you're racist.
Right.
You know, and the right was saying, well, we got to close the borders, you know. And then it just flipped, like, I don't know, one day in March, maybe, you know, kind of over a few days, it just kind of flipped around.
Yeah.
The left were kind of, oh, this is, you know, apocalypse. And the right switched to, you know, get a grip of yourself, it's the flu, you know.
Exactly. And nobody told me, you know, I just woke up one day and they're like, oh, now these guys are Congoing that way. These guys are Congoing that way. Oh my God.
I mean, it's fascinating to see it, you know, in real time happening like that. But yeah, in terms of the trans thing, I'm firmly with the TERFs, really. I don't like trans. I'm on the conservative side with that. I think it's kind of an attack on people's sense of reality, I think.
Yeah.
Really. It's pretty serious, I think, and especially it's got the sort of full weight of the system really behind it. But it seems to be, even though it's got, you know, all that power behind the trans thing, it's still having trouble really. You know, it's encountered trouble in Britain. You know, there's a Tavistock clinic shut down.
Yeah, Britain is thought of as this kind of admirable holdout that, like, American conservatives are kind of hoping can just continue to be strengthened. You know, it doesn't seem to, trans stuff has not gone as far there as it has here.
Right. It depends a lot on the election or the next election. If Labour win, because there's a very strong, they call it, I was surprised to see this, but they called it the LGBT wing of the Labour Party. It's the first time I heard that they have a wing, you know, LGBT wing. But anyway, if Labour get in, then that could change, I think, because there is a lot of pressure on Starmer, Keir Starmer, to kind of be more flexible with trans issues. But he's been trying to, since he took over from Corbyn, he's been trying to present this kind of blue Labour image, really, this kind of patriotic Labour, which is not just kind of complete fabrication. There is a tradition of this, and he's been trying to focus on that. But it's a kind of like juggling the balls, really, you know, because a lot of the Labour members and activists, you know, they're not at all down with patriotism and the rest of it. I don't know what's going to happen if Labour win. You know, that could be quite interesting to see if this Starmer's can steer this course in a more sort of blue Labour direction, or if it's going to be the sort of radicals taking over, you know, policy. You know. But I mean, that's quite concerning, yeah, I would say, yeah. But the Tories are also kind of, you know, they're pretty weak in terms of, like, if you're looking for a Conservative Party to oppose the trans thing, they're not the party for you. I think they will just resist it meekly, you know, kind of weakly, really, until really they can't stop it anymore, and then they will just give away, like they did with gay marriage, really. You know, so
yeah, it's sort of unsatisfying. I mean, so I think of the trans thing as like a real, like, jump the shark moment. It really does seem very different than prior, gay rights agitation, because I don't recall claims on the reality of male and female being implicated in those prior things. You know, be like,
Right.
okay, it's just more like, some small segment of society has same-sex attraction. That is perfectly in line with naturalism. You know, that is reality. There will be some small part, and they're not lying, and they're not denying that they are male or female, or anyone's denying that exists. But we have moved into this weird, like, objective reality denying phase.
It's
But like
actually quite
hard right, like
anti-gay.
the woke left and the hard right would say that me trying to like straddle it and say, well, this is bad, but 1990s gay rights stuff is not bad. They'd say no, there really is this march of progress you have to be on board with if you're on the woke left, and if you're on the hard right, they agree by saying, yeah, this is clearly the next step. How you trying to draw the line where it was 20 years ago just doesn't make any sense, So there is a kind of like, I don't know, epistemic, even conceptual, high-level alliance between hard left and hard right on this stuff that the anti-woke liberals and myself and maybe the TERFs are trying to dodge or something.
Well, I think the TERFs are often kind of Marxist or Marx sympathetic, shall we say, and I think that's why they see it in material terms. Okay, if you've got sort of female DNA, female chromosomes, then you're a woman, right? And there's no two ways about it. And I think that's a sound principle, really. I think we can agree as a society on these things. At least we could for a few hundred years, right? The material reality is consent, the basis of consensus reality. But I think trans attacks that really, and I think it's just the kind of start, really. I mean, in Baudrillard, who I quite often mention, he had this concept of the virtual kind of taking over the real from the real. The real is as a kind of concept of, as I say, material reality and everything that goes with that. So a kind of enlightenment concept, the rational and the real, and then the virtual takes over from this, kind of devours the real, if you like. And it seems like that's happening with the trans thing if it continues, and it can. I think this kind of virtual transformation of things can also occur through different channels, through AI and so on, through sort of virtual reality, and all kinds of things where the material reality becomes kind of irrelevant. I think we've already seen it becoming irrelevant.
I guess to try to sort of steelman the trans side, the trans people who would say, no, this is not a break from material reality. This isn't some postmodern thing. No, it's not virtual. They would say, gender dysphoria really exists. And then, of course, intersex people, extremely rare, but they do exist. I guess they might actually be as close as you can get to, like, not quite male, not quite female. But, I guess the difference between gender dysphoria existing and what you're getting at is actually saying that when you say you are a male, even if you're born female, yes, I'm just going to say that you're a male, and the legal regime and culture at large will treat you as if you're a male. That's the break with reality. But gender dysphoria is not, I guess, strictly speaking, a break with reality.
No, that's true. And the trans as a concept existed before all this started. In terms of dysphoria and etc. But yeah, this demand that you recognize that somebody is a woman or a man, and they weren't born that as that gender. It is a kind of epistemological revolution, really, and I think that's why people are so resistant to it. In part, it's not only about fellas in women's changing rooms, which obviously it is very important, very serious, but it's also people's sense that there's this kind of line being crossed, and they're rather concerned about that. I think rightly so, and we are sort of, I don't know, in sort of Baudrillard terms, defending the real, in some way. So, but I mean, the real is kind of under attack from all sides. I think, but you can go back like decades and you can see that already happening. With let's say Adorno and Horkheimer, when they published the Dialectic of Enlightenment, and they sort of attack the factual mentality, what they call the factual mentality of the 1940s. And there's a kind of attack on positivism, which I think is not unwarranted, because positivism is itself kind of limited sort of view of the world, sort of very, very kind of reductive view of the world. But they're attacking positivism, and then you end up with Foucault, and all these other post-structuralists kind of taking that further. And gradually we are kind of moving away from a materialist idea of the reality into a sort of floating postmodern, kind of concept of things. Yeah, and so we kind of, I think we've been moving away from this materialism for a long time, really, and of course it's aged and abetted by computing, by the internet, by the smartphone, because when you're on these, using these devices, you are in your conscious mind, you're kind of not really in that place, entirely in that physical location anymore. So consciousness gets changed. It's altered. Physical place, physical reality doesn't matter so much anymore, and you can see that then impacting on how people think about things in the world. And kind of getting stupider in many ways, in many respects, because we're thinking in very abstract terms, about all these words of violence, and this is clearly nonsense, really. But
what you say about material reality. So getting away from material reality. For people who are young and have not known being like physically bullied so much. Not like I was too, but I am old enough to have seen that be more of an issue. But for young people who have mainly seen psychic harm or any form of harm come in the form of words on a screen, that is the most relevant form of bullying for them. So that's just the new standard, and that's just kind of this part of this what you're saying about a march toward the virtual.
It really makes me want to bully them.
Right. The virtual, I call it sort of sometimes dematerialization, and Baudrillard talked about the death of the reality principle rather dramatically. But I think that's not over dramatic really, because
it's terrifying. I'm terrified just by the fact that people don't give a shit about history.
I mean, that's part of it, isn't it? Yeah, because you've got these things like, was it the 1619 project, kind of just rewriting history of the United States, really, in this kind of, the Nietzschean way, I would say, where there's no facts, there's only interpretations.
And worst of all, under the guise of being concerned with historical accuracy.
Right. I mean, it's so duplicitous.
Sorry, I'm just gonna sorry, real quickly. You might get further into 1619 project, so I just want to say one last thing about this sort of screen-based existence and getting away from the physical. You could see just kind of normal conservatism, sort of a soft conservatism in the form of like Jonathan Haidt, who talks about depression among young girls because they're using TikTok and stuff. That's already accommodating this new psychic harm or virtual harm and taking it very seriously. And I'm sympathetic to it too. So it's almost like, well, we complain that it's only words on a screen, but we're already sort of moving into this mindset that that is a real harm, and that's the new standard for harm. So.
Right. But I think it's a kind of conflation, isn't it, when you start saying that words are violence, and you're conflating real violence with some kind of verbal bullying, whatever.
Yes, literally, yes, not. But
I think this very characteristic of this kind of dematerialization is a kind of total loss of perspective, really, where people don't have any sense of what is trivial and what is important. And the sort of McLuhan talked about this. Talks about sense ratios, being altered by uses of technology without us being aware of it, really. The relative weight that we give things, weights to different things in our world start to change. And you can get some very strange effects then, where some video of somebody saying the N-word becomes kind of something which sets off apocalyptic riots or something. So
this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, was seeing this video.
Right. Yeah.
Actually,
well, you know what's funny about that? Because it's like we're saying that reacting like that to mere words is part of the kind of capitalist assault on physical reality, but responding like that to responding violently like that to something that's merely symbolic is actually very conservative and very old. So like when Muslims got upset about that woman in East Africa that I think she was like from the West or something, she's teaching there, she named a teddy bear in the classroom Muhammad, they completely flipped out. I mean, it's merely symbolic, and yet they took that very seriously, and that's hardly some kind of 21st century capitalist milieu they're operating in.
That is true.
Sacred cows, of course, come back, in these in sort of developments of liberalism that we see, right? And of course, it's not that recent. I mean, we've had that for some decades now, where you couldn't say the N-word or whatever without being cancelled, right?
Sorry,
but now the
off.
cancellation is more, it's more total, right? So, and I don't know. It seems like a lack of perspective to me, and this kind of whole drive. I mean, we could talk about driven by capitalism. I think it is partly driven by capitalism, but it's also driven by the left wing, left side of politics, and their kind of flight from the material analysis, really.
I kind of wanted to go back to the moment where we were discussing the sort of bifurcation between, sort of mellow 90s, it's okay to be gay, and, the sort of right-wing claims that it was a necessary slippery slope to where we are now from there. But there was a definite loss of touch with reality because, I bring everything back to small fuzzy animals because I like them. And when I was a kid, I had guinea pigs, and guinea pigs have gay sex all the time. Totally part of nature. What guinea pigs don't do is cut off their penises and then try to glue them to other guinea pigs.
Well, those guinea pigs were essentially in prison, though. Okay, so it's different.
That's true.
But maybe they would out in nature too.
But this sort of shrillness of the trans movement really has begun to strike me as anti-gay and really anti-tomboy, and really it's pushing people into stricter gender boxes than ever before. In the 90s, if you were a guy and you were kind of effeminate and you were into other guys, you were gay, okay? Maybe your dad would get mad when you came out, but you were gay, you had sex with other guys, you got on with your life. Now you have to worry about whether you might be a girl, because it's not natural for a guy to be into another guy sexually, but it is natural for him to cut off his penis so he can be a girl. So then it's like, it's always struck me as so anti-gay. I don't know why it's part of the gay, lesbian, bisexual movement.
It is, it's funny you say that. Well, not funny. It should be funny when I say it's funny you say that, but people have sort of noted that, like, Iran of all places uses that logic. What they do with gay people is say, hey, if you want to become a woman, we'll pay for that surgery, because that's clearly what you want. That's clearly what you're. So.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. One thing I noticed, with all the kind of the multiple gender and sexuality flags and so on, is it seems like a sort of attack on any kind of ambiguity, right?
Yes.
That before you could be, okay, he's that guy who's a bit effeminate and sometimes he wears nail polish or whatever. But now you have to say, okay, I am this particular identity, right?
Right.
And it's kind of wiping out any kind of ambiguity or any kind of playfulness, really.
Exactly.
Which seems to be a kind of leitmotif of the current culture, really, that everything must be earnest. There's there's no room for play or ambiguity or kind of irony at all.
How do they manage to make androgyny unsexy?
It's a good question. I mean, I'm a big Bowie fan, right? So I was always interested in this. Yeah. I mean, as a younger man, I was kind of experimenting with that, right? Don't do it anymore because I'm far too old and ugly now. But yeah, in those days I did. But so I'm a bit sympathetic to the kind of people who are experimenting like that.
Oh yeah.
But it seems like it's all in a very joyless kind of spirit nowadays. And it's kind of sad that it's gone that way. I don't know if it's a kind of generational thing. Is it something to do with millennials and Zoomers that
they don't like?
They just don't know how to have fun or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I feel bad because the therapies these people are being offered are so crude. It reminds me of, back in the days when if you were depressed and you couldn't get over it, they'd give you electroshock till you were drooling, or they give you a lobotomy. Like, this is basically a penis lobotomy.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is just kind of shocking and barbaric, isn't it, really? It's baffling almost, but especially when parents decide to go through these things. It's really a glimpse into this kind of dark side of humanity, isn't it? I think, which is always lurking and ready to emerge.
I mean, yeah. I've got to admit, I'm a little scared. I was that tomboy. They might have tried to do this to me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Like you say, it hits a little close to home when you're like, oh my God, if I were 15 now, would I be getting talked into this shit?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. No, it is a very grave issue, isn't it? I think when it comes to involves children.
Yeah, and irreparable physical damage.
They have these surveys of how many people identify as trans, and it's associated with all these other questions. And so, identifying as trans is like just blown up into this huge thing over the last few years. So suddenly teenagers are so much more trans than they realized, we're supposed to believe. But if you so there is a connection between identifying as trans. There's a connection between that and just LGBT stuff, kind of obviously. But it turns out it's the people who identify as bisexual or queer a few years ago who are now calling themselves trans. The people who just said they were, lesbian or gay, not so much. So you can sort of perceive like a lot of people who are just basically straight, perhaps, but just young and just somewhat ill-defined, who are latching onto the trans thing.
Right.
So
I don't feel comfortable in my own skin, and I'm tired of being called a white straight male oppressor. So I'm going to become a woman.
I think that's often what it is, really. Yeah, it's sort of, if you're a guy now, especially a white guy, straight, you don't fit any of the kind of protected categories, right? You don't belong in any of them. So you're kind of at the bottom of the pile, really, in this the woke hierarchy. But if you go trans, you suddenly go to the top of the pile. So it's quite attractive. Yeah?
It's Steve Saylor's flight from white, except for LGBTQ stuff.
Right. Flight from I don't know, from maleness or something. But, yeah. I don't know. It's really crazy, isn't it? We do live in an absolutely mad time, but at least we have a lot to talk about,
Yeah, that's true.
Well, cool. We're like right at an hour and a half, so yeah, it's like 11 o'clock for you guys or something. So
yeah.
Well, thank you.
Right. Yeah, this was fun. Cool. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.